What's up, guys? It's me again, Christian Rodriguez, and today I'm going to talk about my takeaway. Right, that I just finished this book called "Ego's the Enemy" by Ryan Holiday. I highly recommend you read this book. It's a great read. I finished it for the first time. This is definitely a book I plan on revisiting at some point. But yeah, on to the video. So this book was this book really opened my eyes about it. Obviously, it's too long of a book to talk about it in just a YouTube video. Like there's a lot of good insights into that book, so I can't talk about all the insights. But I'm gonna talk about two insights that really like stood out to me in the book, right? And the best way that I can describe the insights to you is by apologies, I probably need some water, but the best way that I'm gonna be able to describe these insights to you is by describing just two stories to you, right? And there are two examples. It's two case studies of why ego can be the enemy, right? And he didn't mention them in the book. I thought of these after I finished reading the book. And one of the examples, right, is one of the leaders, right, during World War II, right, Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany. YouTube, don't ban me. This is just for historical purposes, and I'm using this as an example to get to my point. But basically, Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany, right? He kept saying he's gonna start the Third Reich, which was the German Reich, right? He said he was gonna make it in 1,000-year Reich, right? He was very confident on that. He would always talk about how he would always his plans was he wrote the book Mein Kampf, and his plan was to expand eastward, right, which is where where the Soviet Union was at the time. Now it's the present day Russia. He planned on doing that to create some more living space for the Germans, right? And obviously he started this war, World War II, and I'm gonna speed it up a little bit because obviously there's a lot that happened in between. I'm not gonna get into every detail, but basically, he invaded Poland. Um, Britain and France didn't like that, and they declared war on him. Right? He ended up beating France. Right? So he ended up seeing like early success from just defeating France. France collapsed. It was kind of humiliating because France is like a superpower, and like it showed a picture of Hitler like in Paris, and yeah, it was more. And he made the French go back to Versailles, which is where they ended World War One, where they blamed Germany for the entire war and humiliated Germany, and they made them sign the treaty that France surrendered in the same train that they ended World War One in, right? So it was like like a sense of revenge, and then Britain at the time was by themselves. They were completely isolated, right? And Britain was honestly panicking because they're like, we're kind of screwed. Like, no one's gonna help us. Like, we're trying to get the U.S. to help, but they don't want to help us, right? And Hitler like could have exploited it more, but what did he do? He was like, oh, well, why not invade the Soviet Union? So he did. He invaded the Soviet Union, and he was actually pretty successful in the beginning. He started getting a lot of land. He conquered a lot of territory within the Soviet Union, right? And you would think that Germany's going to win the war. You would think, oh, Germany's just going to take over all of Europe because they already have it, right? They basically have all of Europe. And the thing about Hitler that he didn't really think about, right? He was very, like he started giving himself a story, like this is destiny. This is what we're meant to do, right? Like I know this is going to work the way that I said is going to work, right? Like he was very grandiose with his thinking, right? You could tell he was very grandiose. Like if you study history and you study World War II, Hitler was like the biggest freaking narcissist on the planet, and he thought the world revolved around him. But basically, he ended up, they ended up getting the Soviet Union, and they overextended themselves. They really did, right? The Battle of Stalingrad. I'm going to fast forward. There's a lot more that happened, but the Battle of Stalingrad happened, which is the bloodiest battle in human history. And basically, the city bore the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin's name, right? And Hitler wanted to get that. And obviously Stalin didn't want to give that up because it had his name. So it became like a stubborn battle because both sides refused to retreat and refused to surrender. Because Stalin made it basically illegal to surrender because you'll die if you surrender or if you retreat, right? He made that illegal. Hitler was being stubborn and he thought that since he had early success with France, right, Soviet Union's going to fall easily just like France. But he completely underestimated the Soviet Union. And they ended up going to a long, bloody battle. And the German Sixth Army, the entire German Sixth Army ended up getting encircled. They were also dealing with Russian winters, and they were undersupplied, so they didn't have warm clothing like the Russians did because their supply lines were cut and they were overextended. So basically, they were encircled, and that was like the majority of the German army, right? That was like a large chunk of the German army that was encircled around around Stalingrad, right? And that's when Germany started losing the war. Hitler had the option right before that to, retreat, consolidate power, and maybe lose the battle, but keep his gains, right? But he refused to do that. He didn't want to be seen as weak. He thought that everything that he touched went to gold, right? And then by the time they started losing the war, he refused to. By the time they started losing the war, the Russians were going towards Berlin. They were racing towards Berlin. And he blamed the German people. He said, this is what the Germans deserve for not believing in us, not believing in our destiny, right? Or failing us, or failing me. I think that's what he said, or failing him, right? And that right there, just it caused like millions of people to suffer, right? Obviously in World War II, so it was a very bloody war, but especially the Eastern Front, which is where the Germans and the Soviet Union fought. Way worse than the U.S. and the British. They had it. That was like a normal war, but it was like a conventional war. The Eastern Front was a war of annihilation for both sides, so it was very bloody, right? And it was just brutal. But it's just an example of a narcissist, right? But an egomaniac, right? Because Hitler, he found success, right? And he outright lost the war because of his ego. His ego just thought that he was going to keep winning, right? That he was going to keep taking these risks. He could override, professional advisors. His advisors actually advised against him of doing many things that he did, and he ignored them, right? He ignored their advice, and he did it anyway because he had early success, right? And you got to learn from something like that, right? And then towards the end of the war, when they were going towards Berlin, and he started blaming the German people, he started blaming generals, he was blaming advisors of the failure of Germany, of the war, because the war was basically lost at that point. But in reality, it was his fault, right? He's the one who caused it. It was his arrogance and ego that is not letting him accept the fact that he was the one who caused the war for them to lose the war, right? For some reason, I couldn't say that. But yeah, that's one example of it. Now, the second story, right? The second story is the founder of Disney, right? This is not an evil one. This is like more of a CEO business one. But the CEO of Disney at the time, right? Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner was the CEO of Disney. He had early success with I lost my train of thought, with Aladdin, Lion King, Disneyland, Tokyo. Hit. Disney looked unstoppable. This guy looked like a freaking genius. Everything he touched went to gold, right? That's what it seemed like. Everything looked amazing, right? He was giving himself a story. Everything turns to gold, right? What does he do? Time comes. They're like, we need to open a Disneyland in Europe, right? And they have two options. Paris or Barcelona. Now, advisors, professional advisors, just about all of them told him, "Hey, you should open the park in Barcelona." Why? Because Barcelona has better weather. The Catalan culture will embrace Disney and Mickey Mouse far better than the Parisian culture, right? And it's just better. It's just the logistics are, or it's not the logistics. It was more like the weather, right? And Eisner was like, "No, we're gonna do it in Paris because everything I touch turns to gold. We're gonna do it in Paris because I know it's gonna work. I just know it's gonna work, right?" Well, they ended up doing it in Paris, right? Disney ended up losing millions of dollars from just from outright, like, they lost hundreds of millions of dollars just because the park was a failure. And it's still around, but it was a failure. Why? Because first of all, the French culture saw Disney as imperialism, right? American imperialism, right? Opening a park in France. They didn't see it as they didn't embrace it like the Japanese did when they opened it in Tokyo. They more saw it like it was American imperialism, right? Cultural imperialism. And the French didn't like that. And there were some other cultural things that the French didn't resonate with that Eisner completely ignored, right? Also, the weather is not as great, right? Especially compared to Barcelona. So the park is not as popular as it is in the in the winter, right? In the winter time, the park is probably basically empty compared to if it was in Barcelona. And the long story short, basically Eisner, they lost money for Disney. Eisner ended up getting ousted from Disney. And the point of the matter is Eisner thought his early success turned him to gold, right? He thought his early success was unstoppable, that he was going to always be successful, that everything he did was going to be right, right? And that's his ego. His ego was talking to him, right? And even after his failure, I do not remember the full story because I read it a while ago. But I do think he blamed other people when it came to the failure of the park, right? He didn't take full accountability for it. And that's another thing, right? When it comes to failure, you can't you can't blame anyone but yourself. And that's what I wanted to give you these two examples before I dove into the book, because the point that I wanted to give you guys is that you have to look out for, I know they use three. They use when you're aspiring, but I didn't talk about that in this video. But the other two is success and failure. Those are the two ones that I'm going to talk about. And basically, I just described it with Hitler and I described it with Eisner, right? And basically, both of them got drunk on their own Kool-Aid. They thought they were unstoppable. They thought their early success was going to keep going, and it was going to just be handed to them, right? And nothing was going to stop them because everything was destiny. And that's another thing Ryan Holiday talks about is do not give yourself stories, because when you give yourself stories, you start getting delusional. And when you get delusional, you start making stupid mistakes. And when you start making stupid mistakes, you could screw up your life even more. He didn't say it in that words, but basically he said something similar to that, right? And don't give yourself stories with your early success. You have to humble yourself. You have to remember where you came from. You have to know that you worked hard for it, and you have to keep working. You probably have to work even harder because of your success, right? And then the next point, right, is failure, right? Because everyone fails. It's a matter of time. It's not if you fail. Everyone fails, right? But how do you respond to the failure? Do you see it as a lesson? Do you see it as I got punched, I got knocked out. I just need to get up and learn from this failure and make sure it never happens again, right? Or do what I need to do to minimize it. But the egotistical version of it is by saying that failure is someone else's fault. It's the advisor's fault. It's my business partner's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's my coworker's fault. It's someone else's fault. It's the government's fault. And that's the ego talking, because at the end of the day, the failure was because of you. right? It's always because of you. You have to like get because you have to take full responsibility for it, right? Even if someone else caused it, you still have to deal with the responsibilities. And that's what Ryan Holiday wants people to get the point across with that, right? And sorry, my freaking shoulder's itchy. But yeah, it's you have to think about it in this way, right? When it comes to I'm gonna go back to the success point, but when it comes to success, right? Now, I'm not there yet. I'm still working my way up towards it, but this is very good to understand, right? But when you get up to success, you can now fuck up your life even more than if you were broke, right? Like if you had nothing, if you were nobody, you can now when you end up getting successful, you could destroy your life far more now than when you were broke. So that's when your ego actually needs to go. You need to check your ego even more because when you get successful, right, you might forget how you got there and you might end up falling off faster than a boulder. You might fall off of a cliff like a boulder instead of a rock, right? And and then if you do face failure, you have to be able to take full accountability for it. You have to be able to learn from the failure. You have to see it as something it's okay, failure sucks. I'm not going to say it doesn't suck, but you almost have to see it as something like maybe I needed to experience this so I can um be better prepared or so I could be more mature about it, right? And you just have to find a way to take full responsibility for it. You have to accountability, right? Because if you look back at the example of it, Hitler blamed the German people. He didn't blame his freaking ego on, oh, let's start a three-front war. Let's let's declare war on three major powers because we're winning and it's destiny, right? Let's have an 1,000-year Reich because I said so, right? He just completely he was so drunk on his Kool-Aid that he just completely ignored reality, right? And the same thing with Eisner, right? With Disney. He ignored reality. He assumed French culture was just going to embrace Disney with open arms. Obviously that wasn't the case. That was complete and utter BS, right? And I want you guys to really think about that, right? Um right? Because like myself, right? If you're watching this, you're ambitious, you're working your way towards something, right? Just like I am. And that's something that people like us, we have to be aware of it. We have to check our ego, right? We have to really really look at our ego and think, okay, if I'm successful, right? When I'm successful, I'm going to need to double down or I'm going to need to be more disciplined, right? Because it is so it is easy to just screw your life up even more if you're not careful. And then you have to be able to take accountability because things aren't always going to go to plan. And yeah, if I keep talking, I'm just going to keep repeating myself, so I'm going to stop. But I hope you guys enjoyed the content. I'm going to keep doing these type of talks. I'm going to keep talking about more books that I read. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the content. I'm subscribed to the channel. I'm going to keep creating more stuff. Take care.